first things I remember is Gran giving me a banana. She had it behind her back as she came up the steps out of the old pantry and said, "What have I got for you?" Remember, these were war years, when fruit of that style was hard to come by. How good was that banana? To this day, I still love bananas. I take them for my pack-up, or chopped up in a dish with a sprinkle of sugar and carnation milk. In the war days, there was a thing called the black market. Gran would make butter, milk curd, and collect eggs from our chickens. All this produce would be sold on to a chap called Ernie Burton, of course keeping some back for our own use. Ernie would come at night after tea on his bike to collect it, and paid Gran cash. It would then end up being sold on the black market. I remember sitting on his knee whilst he would draw me a traction engine, and how good those drawings were. When people had it hard in the towns, their cities being bombed and not having enough food, we had more than enough, and it was all homemade. There was always a candle in our bedroom, so that we could see in the dark. When I was laid in bed, I could squint my eyes, and the light would be thin lines. Our toilet was across the yard. No flush in those days. We had Izal paper that skidded up your bum that fast it didn't do the cleaning job very well at all. The first Christmas I remember was when I was about 4 years old. I got a 3-wheel trike. I don't think it was new, but I loved it. I would go up and down the lane without being bothered by traffic, just folk on cycles now and then. The year of 1947 brought the severe winter. Heavy snow started in January and everywhere was cut off. My Uncle Ben was the youngest brother to Mam. He was born on the 16th of July 1930, and at the time of Mam's death would have been 13 years old. He and his friend, Colin Walker, from the next farm, had a donkey each. These were taken in for the winter from Cleethorpes. Ben made a snow plough out of wood, and him and Cole ploughed the road open with the donkeys pulling it. That I remember very well. I distinctly remember wearing long leggings and walking in the nettles near the back door, but they never stung me. Something I really enjoyed was watching the farm workers clean out manure in the crew yard and load it onto tractors and trailers. I wanted to help, so I got Pearl's pram and filled it with manure and toddled off down the lane about 3/4 of a mile over a small wooden bridge, which was just wide enough for me and the pram. Gran realised I was missing and got on her bike. She found me having a glass of milk at the old lady's house over the bridge, pram parked outside the back door, full of manure. Poor Gran told me this story when I was much older, and still with worry and concern in her voice. I can understand now how she must have felt, especially just having lost our mother. It must have been awful not knowing where I was, especially at that time. There would always be about 6 or 7 German prisoners of war living in a large mobile hut outside our farm on the roadside. The prisoners worked on the farm, but I'm not sure who provided them with food. I do remember one of them making me a tractor out of wood. I wish I still had it. He had painted it, and I got fresh paint on my fingers. I remember once Ralph took me to Wintringham railway station on a Bedford lorry when I was 4, with a load of Savoy cabbages. Gran used to boil these in the bacon water. The meal was boiled bacon, mashed spuds and cabbage. I only had the spuds and cabbage, but it was very good. For cereal, she would steep wash wheat in boiled water until swollen, and then add milk, sugar and other ingredients. It was so good. It was named Fromity, and we had it for breakfast. Gran would chill our oatmeal drinks in the cool dairy where she used to churn the butter. Pearl and I used to take it to Pop when he was working in the harvest field, stooking the corn sheaves. Pop had a pony called Pat and a trap. Back then, the corn was cut with a binder, which produced sheaves of corn. These had to be stooked for them to ripen and dry, ready for gathering, then taken back to the stackyard by horse and cart, and later by tractor and trailer. In the winter months, the thrashing contractor would be hired to thrash the corn. It took 8 men to do this. Today, a combine harvester can do 80 acres of corn a day with just 2 men. Back in my farming days, it was common to see 6 or 7 men working on a 350-acre arable farm. How times have changed. So Pearl and I set off to give Pop his drink. On our way down to the fields, we had a swallow of the drink each, and by the time we got there was only half a bottle left. Poor old Pop just laughed at us. Gran used to talk about Clixby Top Farm quite a lot when we were all at home, and she would say it was the best place they ever lived in. In the days it ranked number 1 and was owned by Hiltons, and Ralph tells me it still is. In the spring of that year, Gran and Pop moved to Barrowmere, whilst Pearl and I went to live with Ralph and Marjorie at Barton. The reason for that was the house attached to the small holding at Barrowmere was in a poor state. A local rogue had lived in it called Wootton Robbie. He had a bit of a reputation and kept animals he'd pinched from the farmers in the area in the house into which we were all moving. How does that sound? He had been evicted, and the property had been purchased by a farmer called Jack W. Leaning, who also had a large farm about a mile away down the lane. This is where Pop would work for the next 7 years, walking to work every day with one leg, the other being artificial because of the First World War. He was capable of doing many duties on the farm, like stacking corn sheaves, making haystacks, feeding cattle. He wouldn't let his one leg hold him back. Once at thrashing time, where a contractor would arrive with a thrashing drum, combine harvester today, elevator and Fordson tractor towing it in, a rat ran out of the corn stack and straight up Pop's artificial leg. One of the men shouted, "Watch out, Jessie, that bloody rat has just run up your trouser leg." Pop, in his stride, grabbed it and squeezed it dead, pulled it out and slung it away. Laughing, he said, "Huh, that won't run much more." Pop had seen quite a few rats in the 1914-18 war trenches in France, and that one wasn't going to spoil his day. My Pop was also a master at hedging. This was a well-known trade in the farming world back then. Jack Leaning, the boss and farm owner, always said to many folks in and around Barton that Pop was one of the best hedgers he had ever seen. Pop was a good gardener, and we used to grow all our own vegetables. The fertiliser came from our outside toilet, which sounds a bit gross, but the vegetables were always there in abundance and tasted so fresh and good. I remember Gran's favourite flower in the summer. It was called night-scented stock. It came in a packet, and she would sow the seeds just across the yard on the edge of the lawn. When they grew into their glory, in the summer evening, the beautiful fragrance filled the air. Gran always commented on the smell and would say, "Oh, don't the stock smell lovely tonight?" Back in those laid-back days, I remember the summers were warm and lasted forever. So Pearl and I stayed with Ralph and Marjorie at Barton while the house was cleaned and decorated. Just after the war, the colours were very few. I only remember green, cream and brown, and in wallpaper there was very little choice. I remember going on the bus after school one summer night and having tea with Gran and Pop. Gran used to make wonderful salads, so tasty. Butter on the bread, all added to the taste. She would flavour the salads with fresh mint, something we don't do now. Then we caught the bus back to Barton at the old lane end, and I remember well that summer night, whilst waiting for the bus, the smell of the hayfield close by, the sound of the old bus stopping for us. I think we stayed with Ralph and Marjorie until the July of that year. She would have been 19 then. They lived in a little cottage in Junction Square, which was their first home. Ralph was working then as a tractor driver for the same farm as Pop, but left soon after and worked for Barton Council. Ralph entered a ploughing match at Barton Vale Farm, which he won. Their tractor was a standard Fordson with a Ransom semi-digger plough for 2 furrows. The year was 1945, and the prize was £3, which was a lot of money in those days. Pop used to always say that Ralph was a very good tractor driver and could do anything on the farm. Marjorie and Ralph have always been there for us, like a special big brother and sister-in-law, and at the same time a special auntie and uncle. The little cottage they had was cosy, and we enjoyed being there with them. It must have been a huge commitment for two young people to take on looking after two children. Back then, being small, responsibility is something you don't think about, though. Marjorie would make caramel puddings, and I remember her homemade chips were the best. Of course, she could cook anything and make it good. Marjorie started me at school in January 1947. I walked with the others, and she held my hand, and I remember her saying everything would be all right, reassuring me with her soft voice. I remember my first teacher was a kind lady called Mrs. Marrows. Other teachers I liked were Mrs. Coulham and Mrs. Snow. I loved being in Mrs. Coulham's class, as she was a mother figure to me with her kind, understanding way. She was always ready to smile and praise you. She also had a daughter called Dawn, who we see occasionally, and like her mother, she's a lovely lady with the same smile. The smell of the classroom and school milk I remember well. I didn't like the milk. It was sometimes warm and tasted awful, but some of the kids from the larger families had too. I also remember how scary it was, all the kids and noise at playtime. I was quite timid and shy, and always stood near the wall with another boy called John Shepherd. He had a polio leg with a caliper and built-up shoe, and we remained good friends all the way through school. I remember seeing a lot of kids with calipers on their legs. This was quite common back then. In the canteen, we would queue up at the food hatch, and the ladies would serve us. I remember a lady called Mrs. Bennet serving us with mashed potato. She was also always so nice to me and always cheered me up. The head mistress of the infants was Miss Lawson. She was quite scary to look at and quite Victorian. I remember her smacking a boy's backside for throwing conkers in the playground. Wouldn't happen today. Getting a slap was commonplace. We didn't even say anything when we went home. But I got used to school and the teachers and went through the infant classes okay. Having moved in with Gran and Pop at Barrowmere, we settled into catching the service bus every morning at 8:25. Then there was the long walk from the marketplace all the way to county school across Barton. Not much time to spare.